This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Episode 400, my friends, and I'm so excited. I'm not 400, 700. I was confused by the URL at the bottom. GoGetter.io is my day job, but this is part of ChristophTrapp.com. Check it out for any content strategy tips and tricks and everything that I know about content strategy. But today we want to talk about podcast episodes, podcast seasons. Should we do a podcast season? How many episodes should go into a season? Or should we just number the episodes and keep going and keep going? That's what I did. And that's how I got to 700 episodes. So super excited to be joined by Michael Buzinski today. He has his own show that you can check out over at buzzworthymarketing.show. It's at the bottom there. And I'll be interested to find out what's his opinion. Seasons or no seasons? Let's get this debate going. Michael, nice to see you.
Got to get the flair too, you know.
And drop, or there was another thing.
That's a new one for me.
Somebody did that the other day, and I was like, "That's new." But anyway, nice to see you. I've been on your show, and that's kind of where this idea started. We should talk about this because should you do a season? And I did the Content Marketing Awards this year, so I had judged the podcasts, and there was some in there they had seasons. And the number of episodes per season was all over the place. There was like 5 episodes, 12 episodes. I don't think it went much higher than that. But tell me, why should you even consider doing a season for your podcast? Or why shouldn't you just keep going and going and going like I did for episode 700? Thanks for joining me for it.
I know. I've got the privilege of an even number here. That's pretty cool. The thing we used to have a serial podcast is really what you're talking about. So you have so episodic versus, we all talk about episodes so-and-so, but it's really serial. It's just an ongoing conversation. And when we were in the infancy of our podcast, I had studied a lot and I'd seen both. But what I enjoyed or I thought about when I was looking at mine is I enjoyed having themes. So when I was looking at other people's podcasts, and I studied podcasts for like a year before I started my own, and I guested on over 100 of them as well as I was launching my book. And I noticed that the people who had a serial or no seasons, it's just an ongoing conversation, right? It's the same topic, which I get. But I wanted to have the ability to segment into different themes on the topic. And what that allows me to do is be able to focus on certain aspects of our overarching topic. So just earlier this year, we did a 13 episode series or a season basically, on AI and marketing in AI. And so I focused on having guests that were in AI. I did monologues on my take on AI and all that good stuff. So then when I'm out in the real world and people are talking about certain things and they're like, oh yeah, and my podcast comes up, I can go, oh yeah, go back to check out season 7. We spend 13 episodes talking just about that one thing. So it gives reference. And it's easier for us to be able to refer to those different episodes because a lot of what we talk about is evergreen.
It is evergreen, but you know what? So if a season is a topic, I had all kinds of topics on the show, and I bet I could categorize them, and then they could just become a season if I were to republish all these episodes.
Sure,
but they're not back to back, right? They're not together necessarily unless we interlink them. And we don't talk about the same thing. That actually drives me crazy when people message me and email me, Michael, and they go, can I come on your show and talk about storytelling? And I'm like, what about it? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we have enough episodes that talk about the concept of storytelling. You're not coming on my show if you're going to tell us that people relate to stories really well. And that's why your company should sell. We don't need that. We do not need that. But what is the advantage of creating a 12 episode package on podcast production, right? Which like this
Yeah.
would fall into, like, or
Right.
podcast strategy. Do people want to listen to 12 episodes, or do they want to listen to different pieces, or like is that a realistic expectation that people will actually listen to 12 things just because they care about that topic today?
Well, I think that it comes down to your type of listener, though, right? If we think about like the people who listen to our shows, and if you understand the needs of your listeners, if you barrel down, if you're always talking about a different topic every week, do you really get deep enough without having like a 3-hour episode to really get all of the things you could talk about in a particular theme? Or a subtopic, if you will. So, like podcasting is a subtopic of storytelling, right? We're here telling stories, and if I were to say, like you were saying, like have a 12 episode uh, series, that would be something that I could start diving into the strategy. I could look at the planning. I could look at the messaging. I could look at the production. I could look at the follow up and all of these things, so that if somebody's when you're bringing that in, they're now getting better and better information. Now, if you're not planning out your episodes, like we plan out a whole season, a season ahead. So we're already looking at, we're recording this in the middle of November. My team has already started on the outline of next season, which starts in January. And so the guests and all that other stuff are being picked and getting scheduled to get recorded, and those are going to be a lot of those will be recorded before the end of the year. So having help us with the planning of our show, so we're not meandering. But then there's people who meandering's okay, and they do want to have just the feeling lucky Google search of their podcast. It's okay.
You know, the one thing I will concede this point, honestly, is that when you have episodes that build on each other, you can ask related questions and build on the last one, right? So, for example,
Mhm,
last week we had Mitch Jackson on the show, and he talked about AI and marketing in
mhm,
general.
mhm,
Later this week, I got Christopher Penn on, who's talking specifically about AI and copyright. So
mhm.
those episodes, they complement each other, right, to an
Yes.
extent.
Mhm.
And because they're so close to each other, I remember what I should ask that we didn't cover in the other episode because it's only 24 minutes, right? For
Right.
example. But the one thing I am struggling with just a little bit. So what you just described sounds completely planful, like,
Mhm,
like very disciplined, organized, whatever.
mhm, mhm,
But what I know, the reality is that companies stop podcasting because they can't find a guest for a certain time.
mhm,
They
mhm.
can't do certain things or whatever. The timeline is too tight.
Right.
Um, so how do the logistics work? Because like even my podcast, as you can see today, we're streaming at 1 p.m. Central Time.
Mhm,
Some days we're streaming at 9 a.m. Central. We're
mhm,
streaming whenever you have
mhm.
time to talk to me,
Right.
right? So
Mhm,
I'm not like trying to be too prescriptive, I guess. So how
mhm,
about those logistics? How do you get around those very common issues of people not being available, or people,
mhm.
whatever? Or is it
Right.
because you do an audio podcast and no live stream? Tell me more. How do you
Okay.
get
Yeah.
that to work?
So live streams. I mean, the strategy of live streaming technically is that you do want to be streaming live at the same time, so people know when to. But you can get away with. There's like let me preface everything I'm about to say. There is no right or wrong way to podcast. It is your show. You can do it however you want. There are reasons why people do certain things. Like live streaming is a really great way of getting your podcast out there without having to deal with editing, right? So no post production, right? So for me, I like the structure because we utilize a lot of the topics in other places. So we repurpose a lot of our content. So if it's planned out, we know how we can leverage what's coming up in the next quarter with the season that is being broadcast that season. So this is the workaround for people who are as busy as I am and want to have some type of structure in their conversation. One is, if you're just starting out, start out by recording an entire season and having it in the can before you even start broadcasting. So now you're automatically 13 weeks out. Okay, if you decide to do 13-week seasons, 13 weeks is one quarter. You have four quarters. You have 4 seasons in a year. Some people do 180 days. Some do a mini, what we used to call mini series, which is only 5, which is a deep dive into one topic, and there'll be 5 episodes, and they package those in different places and all that good stuff. But when you have it planned out a quarter ahead, and you're now recording what's going to happen 3 months from now. Now, what you're going to want to do even after that is have a couple of spare interviews that are going to be something that if something happens to recording, something happens last minute, and there's this one guest you wanted in a season, but they couldn't record until that season, and then all of a sudden they fell through, you're going to have to either come up with a monologue for yourself. So always have a couple of monologues that you can just record yourself and then publish that, or have backup interviews that relate to your overall topic and just put it in there, because this is the secret. Even though you're creating and curating this very planned and structured conversation, people don't pay attention unless you continue to remind them every week, like you were talking about.
Well, the one other thing I really disagree with is you do not need to live stream at the same time every time. By the way, I know you said do whatever you want. It's your podcast. You kind of talked your way out of that a little bit. But my opinion is you do it whenever you want to. And the reality is of these live streams, especially on LinkedIn, most of the viewership comes on the replay, which is completely mind-blowing to me still anyways. I mean, you could have, I don't know, a couple hundred on the live stream, and then you got like a couple thousand on the replay, which is like, that's literally not what a live stream is. But I think it's because the way it shows up after the fact and the way people can find it and those kind of things.
Well, so, and then your algorithm, I mean, that's your algorithm. Not everybody's on at the same time, right?
Correct. Yep.
Right. And so you get away with it more now than you on some. I would say you get away with it more on like LinkedIn than you might on, say, Facebook. But I haven't done the research on that because we don't live stream ours. But I mean, even if you subscribe to going live stream, you can record your interviews anytime you want on something like whatever you're using right now. I'm sure you can record it and then schedule it to live stream for you later on. I know my podcasting platform, StreamYard, allows us to do that. So we can record everything. We can even take that down and do a bunch of post-production, put it back into the system, and then schedule it to live stream at a particular time in the future, which is also another way to get around making sure that you always are on air as often as you are. Because it's really, like you said, might not be as much as the time, but the frequency and consistency is what people start counting on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other thing I do too, I can do in Restream. So we're streaming through Restream right now. Mm-hmm. I can schedule it again, and it's going to loop like 10 times. So that's kind of a nice feature that you can use as well. And
well, how do you? So talk to me a little bit about Restreaming. So what's if people are finding you through the replays, how are you leveraging the Restream on the same content?
So first of all, what I was saying is, so people find me on the replay, right? Mm-hmm. They just watch it. It's already there. Mm-hmm. But you were saying I could schedule a live stream. So we could actually record this, and then we could schedule the live stream. And that rebroadcast, that live stream is actually, it could loop 10 times, which is kind of a crazy thing. So 224 minutes turn into 240 minutes. And it just goes and goes and goes. And people don't really pay attention because they come and go and they check it out when they want to. But I'm a big fan of live streaming. Now, the other thing I'm struggling with is, so I come across ideas. So this idea, I was on your show, the Buzzworthy Marketing Show, and I said, we should do a thing on this topic. Right. And now I'm doing same thing the other day. I was actually talking to one of the people that was a guest recently on your show, and she's getting a new website. And I was like, we should talk about this website strategy. And the only reason I ran across that idea is because she was talking about it, right? Because I run across people talking about things, and I'm like, I got to talk about this now or whenever the next opening is. I know you and I talked many, many months ago, but how do you decide what bubbles up to the top? And I mean, let's go deeper than business reasons or whatever, but like how do you actually decide? And like it's way harder to, do that when you have seasons as opposed to just I'll talk about this today and this tomorrow.
Right. So we have multiple shows. And so we have our episodic and seasons. Our seasoned show is the Buzzworthy Marketing Show. And we decide what topics to run for the next season based upon what conversations we've had for the last 13 weeks. Right. And so if I hear an ongoing topic that's bubbling up. So like when we decided to do AI, it was right after like ChatGPT exploded and then Gemini like imploded and like everybody was confused and we're like, okay, people want answers to this topic. Let's curate the conversation. I happen to have a lot of friends that are in the AI space. They're leaders in that space. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to use you guys to help me help our audience make some sense of this, right? And other times it has to do with what we're trying to put out there as far as what we think is important, right? And those are all fine and dandy. And the great thing about a season is you don't have to have it on a like a micro topic. You can have it on a broad enough topic to where you can fit other types of conversation in there, and a little bit of creativity you can always wedge in, like a comment on like websites, like that example that you had. It's like you could easily do a bonus episode in that season and blow it up and say, hey, listen, we're going to do a bonus season. I was talking to my friend about her website and development and stuff like that. And I started asking questions about AI and we just felt like you guys should hear this, and you can just pop it in. Again, you own your show. So you can do bonus content. You could do a live stream instead of a scheduled podcast. Like we have podcast on the podcast directories, but we also have a YouTube channel that has the video of all of our podcasts. And so on my other show, it is a stream of thought, and it is what conversation are we having this week? And they are who I am talking to on a regular basis going, hey, let's talk about that. Oh, great. It's not going to be a good fit for one show, but this other show allows me to have that freedom to talk about whatever I want. See, episode to episode.
What's interesting to me too about your answer is like when I hear seasons, I hear structure. This is how we do it, blah, blah, blah. But what you just said is, well, sure, it's structured, but you can also have a bonus episode. Duh. I do bonus episodes all the time, right? I mean, I'm like a guest is a regular episode. And every once in a while, I think I haven't done it in a while, but every once in a while I'll do an episode myself where I'm just talking about whatever. And I call it a bonus episode, and at one point I had like 60 episodes like that or something like that. That's in addition to the 700. Right. So like, don't be so stuck in the system. I think that's my takeaway.
I think people paint themselves into corners thinking, well, I made this rule. Well, when you're the rule maker, you get to be the rule breaker. And as long as you make sense of it to your audience to where you don't leave them confused, you're okay.
You don't even have to be the rule breaker. If you make the rules, you just make a new rule, right? And that's kind of how that goes. Yeah. Now, if you were to have a season, how many episodes should you have in a season? How many episodes do you have in yours, and what would you recommend?
So I have prescribed to 13 episodes, one per week. We publish on Tuesdays every week. And then we have follow-on promotion on social media and YouTube and stuff like that on Tuesday through Friday, or Wednesday through Friday. And the reason that we did 13 weeks is because it gives you that 3-month space, and so it gives you enough time to explore. Enough, right? Like, and even if it's not like, well, you had 3 really deep conversations, you can have really related one. I feel like if you have too short of a season, say like 10 episodes, you're changing your theme so often that it almost feels like might as well just have the ongoing no seasons, right? But there are people, like you said, that they have maybe 5 or 6, and those are limited series. And those are usually reserved for when you're doing what will not become a ongoing podcast, but it'll be a limited series podcast where you're like, hey, we're talking about XYZ for these 6 episodes. They're going to be highly curated episodes. They're going to be longer than your normal because you're going to go deep diving into 6 aspects of a very particular topic. And when it gets published, you'll see it. There'll be only 6 of them there, but the title is exactly what they're talking about. And the only thing they're going to be diving into is that topic.
I know the average is there's only, most podcasts have like 10 episodes or something, and then they quit.
Right.
And I guess if you follow the 13 episodes per season concept, you're already above that. But
Yeah.
if you have a season, does that help people keep moving, or what are the reasons it could?
I like that idea. For me, it just keeps structure and it puts deadlines, right? Like there was a time, like I said, we didn't start with seasons, but I found that when I had seasons, it helped my planning out a lot better. And I get a lot of requests for people to be on my show. And with seasons, it allows me to say no more often, or no, not right now. I do have a season that we are planning on. Can we talk with you in 6 months when we're doing that season? Right. So yeah, if you started out with like, hey, I'm going to do 13 episodes before I even get started, now you're ahead of the curve of everybody. Like most of the people who die within 10. The reason most people don't get past 10 episodes though is because of poor planning. So if you're a poor planner, having a season might help you be a better planner because now you have some structure to plan around. When you don't have any structure and you're a bad planner, you're probably going to be like the guy who goes to the gym once to maybe twice a week because he never has a plan to be at the gym at a certain time every week, ...
It's just interesting that, hopefully it helps people to keep their podcast going. And I think that's, you and I both know podcasting works. I think it's a great way to connect with people, get your message out there, share your story. It's interesting. Do you get a lot of pitches for your show? I get a lot of pitches on my show, but pretty much all the guests that are on a typical episode, I find them, right? So when people come to me, they usually get the sponsored link back, right? So they can buy a sponsored slot. And that's kind of how they come on, which I guess would create another problem if I had seasons because their topic might not fit at all. So I would have to rethink that potentially. But how do you typically find guests for your show? Is it inbound or outbound?
It's both. And I love your idea of like, oh yes, you can be a sponsor of an episode and you get to come on it. And I would, if I had that, instead of trying to squeeze them into my seasons, I would then take them to my other podcast, the Buzzworthy Consultant podcast, and they would be a guest on that show. So I was like, yeah, not maybe for the show that they're pitching for, but I have another show. And the great thing is those people who are calling you, they're usually agents for somebody who is paying them to get you on. So sometimes they have a budget to do something like that, and sometimes they don't. But the thing is they're trying to sell something half the time. And so I leave that other podcast out there so that I have that flexibility of somebody. I'm like, oh, they're interesting enough, but they're not meeting they're not meeting the topic area that my main podcast is about. So it gives me that flexibility.
Well, I think I'm seeing another episode coming up here down the road on how many podcasts does your company really need? That's kind of an interesting topic too. I used to have a bunch and I kind of whittle it down to this one and just focus here. But Michael, was really great to see you once again. Another return guest here to the Business Storytelling Podcast, episode 700 is in the books. And how do people connect with you? Who should reach out to you?
Well, if you want to check out our podcast, it's buzzworthymarketing.show. Next season, we're actually whittling this down to B2B marketing. It's actually getting rebranded to the B2B marketing show. But buzzworthymarketing.show will be there. We're just wrapping up season 9. And if you want to check out what we're doing over at Buzzworthy Marketing, just go to buzzworthy.biz.
Fantastic. And we're out.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.